So there I was, Jake Martinez, professional pipe fixer and amateur coffee enthusiast, wandering the bowels of Croxar Prime's most prestigious entertainment complex, with a steaming mug of what the vending machine optimistically called Earthblend Classic. And let me tell you, when you're 3 sectors deep into an alien space station at 7 in the morning, hunting for a quiet spot to enjoy your caffeine in peace, you tend to follow whatever corridor looks promising. The maintenance tunnels of the Galactic Coliseum are about as exciting as they sound. Gray walls, humming ventilation systems, and the occasional warning sign in 17 different alien languages, most of which basically translate to, "Don't touch this or you'll explode." Standard Tuesday morning stuff, really. I'd been called in to fix a water recycling unit that had apparently decided to start dispensing what the locals described as liquid regret, and honestly, after 3 years of maintaining alien plumbing, nothing surprises me anymore. But as I rounded a corner, following what I thought was a maintenance access tunnel, I started hearing this weird, rhythmic thumping sound, like someone was playing the galaxy's most violent game of patty cake. The noise was getting louder, and there was this strange orange glow coming from up ahead. Now, in my line of work, strange glows usually mean either radiation leak or something's on fire. But my coffee was still hot, and I figured I'd investigate. That's when I pushed through what I thought was a service door, and found myself standing in the middle of the most massive arena I'd ever seen in my life. Picture this, a circular fighting pit roughly the size of a football stadium, surrounded by 50,000 screaming alien spectators. The walls stretch up so high you need binoculars to see the cheap seats, and every surface is covered in holographic displays showing close-ups of 2 very large, very angry-looking creatures trying to murder each other in the center ring. The air smells like ozone, alien sweat, and what I can only describe as impending violence. And there I am, standing in the main entrance tunnel, wearing my standard issue maintenance coveralls and holding a mug that says, "World's Okayest Human," in faded letters. The entire Coliseum went dead silent. 50,000 aliens, representing probably 200 different species from across the galaxy, all turned to stare at the idiot human who just wandered into their sacred gladiatorial championship with breakfast in hand. The silence was so complete you could hear the coffee cooling in my mug. Down in the fighting pit, 2 enormous gladiators had frozen mid-combat, weapons raised, both looking up at me with expressions that somehow managed to convey confusion despite their completely non-human faces. The massive display screens that had been showing brutal close-ups of the fight now featured extreme close-ups of my bewildered face, broadcasting my "oh crap" expression to the entire galaxy. I took a sip of coffee and wondered if this was covered under my health insurance. Down in the fighting pit, the 2 gladiators were having what I can only describe as an interspecies moment of what the hell is happening. On the left side of the arena stood Thok the Destroyer, and let me tell you, whoever named this guy had zero imagination but perfect accuracy. 8 feet of scaled muscle, built like someone had taken a crocodile, given it steroids, and taught it to walk upright while carrying weapons that looked like they'd been forged in the heart of a dying star. His breathing sounded like a diesel engine with anger management issues. On the right was Queen Vexara, and if Thok was the nightmare your brain conjures up, Vexara was what happens when geometry gets really, really mad. She looked like someone had taken the concept of a crystal chandelier and decided it needed to learn martial arts. Razor-sharp appendages jutted out at impossible angles, refracting the arena lights into deadly rainbow patterns, and every movement made this sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Both of these walking apocalypses were staring at me like I'd just walked into their wedding wearing flip-flops. The arena's announcer, a blob-like creature whose voice boomed from speakers embedded in the walls, finally found his words. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient beings," he said, his voice carrying that perfect tone of professional confusion. "This is Blix Gornathon, your championship announcer, and I have to say, in 47 years of calling fights, I have never seen anything quite like this." I waved my coffee mug at the crowd in what I hoped was a friendly gesture. About 3,000 aliens immediately ducked behind their seats. "Is that?" Blix continued, clearly reading from some kind of database. "Is that a human?" "Our xenobiology experts are saying that's a human. From Earth, the maintenance planet." Ah yes, Earth, the galaxy's favorite punchline. See, when humanity finally made contact with the wider galactic community about 50 years ago, we discovered that our main export was apparently janitorial services. Turns out, most advanced civilizations had moved past the concept of fixing things when they break, and just bought new stuff instead. But humans? We'll duct tape anything back together and call it good as new. So while other species were out conquering star systems or transcending physical reality, humans became the guys you called when your space toilet was making that weird noise. I looked around the arena, taking in the magnificent architecture, the advanced holographic displays, and the 50,000 aliens who were still staring at me like I'd just materialized out of thin air, which, from their perspective, I basically had. "Well," I said, loud enough for my voice to carry in the sudden silence, "this is awkward." Thok's massive head tilted to one side, and he made a sound like a confused dinosaur. Queen Vexara's crystalline form shifted, her razor appendages moving in what might have been the alien equivalent of a shrug. And somewhere up in what I assumed were the VIP boxes, I could hear frantic alien voices having what sounded like a heated debate about protocol, regulations, and what exactly you're supposed to do when the sacred gladiatorial tournament gets crashed by a maintenance worker with a coffee addiction. The frantic alien debate in the VIP section suddenly cut off, replaced by a voice that made the arena's sound system vibrate with authority. "When Emperor Zelgarth speaks, apparently even the laws of physics pay attention." "Human!" the voice boomed, and I swear the coffee in my mug rippled like that scene from Jurassic Park. "You have violated the sacred arena of Kroxar Prime." I looked up toward the Imperial box, where I could make out a figure that looked like someone had crossed a mantis with a very angry opera singer. Emperor Zalgorth was gesturing with what appeared to be 12 different arms, none of which looked particularly happy to see me. "Explain your presence, maintenance creature." Maintenance creature. Charming. I took another sip of coffee and considered my options. I could try to explain that I was just looking for a quiet spot to drink my morning caffeine, but something told me that wasn't going to fly with the 50,000 bloodthirsty spectators who'd paid good money to watch people get dismembered. "Well, Your Majesty," I called back, "I was fixing your water recycler, took a wrong turn, and now I'm here. Great arena, by the way, very atmospheric." The crowd murmured in what I assumed was the galactic equivalent of, did he just compliment the Emperor's interior decorating while trespassing? "By the ancient laws of Kroxar," Zelgorth continued, apparently not interested in my architectural critique, "many being who enters the sacred arena are invited must either face immediate execution or trial by combat." I nodded thoughtfully. "Those are my options? Death or fighting these two?" I gestured toward Thok and Vexara, who were still frozen in their what is happening poses. "Indeed. Now here's the thing about being a maintenance worker in space. You spend most of your time dealing with problems that seem impossible until you actually think about them for 5 minutes. Broken hyperdrive? Usually just a loose connection. Artificial gravity going haywire? Someone probably spilled coffee on the control panel. Alien Emperor demanding you fight to the death? Well, that was a new one, but the principle seemed similar. I drained the rest of my coffee and set the empty mug down on what appeared to be an ornamental pedestal. Several aliens in the front row gasped, probably because I'd just used a priceless artifact as a coaster. "All right," I said, shrugging off my maintenance jacket and tying it around my waist. "I choose trial by combat, but I've got a few questions about the rules." The silence that followed was so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. 50,000 aliens were processing the fact that the maintenance human had just accepted a death match with the galaxy's most feared gladiators. Blix, the announcer's voice cracked as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, the human has accepted trial by combat. Our odds makers are, well, they're not sure what to do with this. The betting windows are showing error 404, human not found across the board." Down in the pit, Thok was flexing his massive claws and making what I assumed were intimidating growling sounds. Queen Vexara had shifted into what looked like a combat stance, her crystalline appendages catching the light in ways that were both beautiful and absolutely terrifying. "So," I called out to the Emperor, "any rules I should know about? Time limits? No biting? Do I get a weapon or am I supposed to improvise?" "The arena provides no weapons," Zelgorth announced. "Combat continues until surrender or death. There are no other rules." I looked around the fighting pit, taking inventory. Sand, some decorative rocks, a few scattered weapons that previous gladiators had probably dropped when they died horribly, and my empty coffee mug sitting on its fancy pedestal. "Got it," I said, cracking my knuckles. "No rules, I can work with that." The crowd was getting restless, clearly expecting me to either run screaming or collapse in terror. Instead, I walked over to Thok and Vexara, who were now eyeing me like I was either the bravest or stupidest creature they'd ever encountered. "Nothing personal, guys," I told them. "I just really need this job, and apparently getting executed for trespassing would look bad on my performance review." Thok the Destroyer apparently decided that the talking portion of our encounter was over because he let out a roar that sounded like a freight train colliding with a volcano and charged straight at me. Now, I want to be clear about something. I am not a fighter. I'm a guy who fixes pipes and occasionally argues with vending machines. My combat experience consists of one self-defense class I took in college and a memorable encounter with a particularly aggressive space raccoon that had gotten into the station's garbage system. But when 8 feet of angry reptile is bearing down on you at 30 miles per hour, you discover that the human brain has some interesting emergency protocol. Time seemed to slow down as Thok approached. His massive claws extended and his jaws opened wide enough to use me as a toothpick. The crowd was on its feet, 50,000 aliens screaming for blood, and the holographic displays were getting extreme close-ups of what everyone assumed would be my imminent demise. Instead, I did something that apparently no gladiator in the history of the arena had ever done. I stepped sideways and said, "Excuse me." Thok, who had been expecting me to either charge back at him or cower in terror, went thundering past me like a confused locomotive. His momentum carried him straight into the arena wall with a sound like a construction accident. The impact was so hard that dust rained down from the ceiling, and several aliens in the lower sections dove for cover. The silence that followed was broken only by Thok shaking his massive head and making a sound like, "What just happened?" "Sorry about that, big guy," I called over to him as he extracted himself from the wall. "Didn't mean to make you miss. Want to try again?" This is when I learned something interesting about alien psychology. Apparently, being polite to someone who's trying to kill you is so far outside their experience that it causes a kind of mental short circuit. Thok stood there for a solid 10 seconds, his tiny reptilian brain trying to process why his opponent was apologizing for not standing still long enough to be murdered. Queen Vixara, meanwhile, was circling us both with the fluid grace of a predator, her crystalline appendages shifting and refracting the arena lights. She was clearly the smarter of the two, analyzing my movement patterns and trying to figure out what kind of fighting style I was using. The problem was, I wasn't using a fighting style. I was using maintenance worker logic, which operates on the principle that every problem has a solution if you're willing to think outside the box and aren't too proud to look ridiculous while solving it. Thok charged again, this time trying to anticipate my sidestep. Unfortunately for him, I didn't sidestep. Instead, I dropped to one knee and rolled under his massive legs like I was sliding under a broken conveyor belt. As I rolled past, I reached up and tapped him on what I assumed was his ankle. "Tag, you're it," I said, popping back to my feet behind him. The crowd was making sounds I'd never heard before. 50,000 aliens were experiencing collective confusion, and it was apparently very loud. Blix, the announcer, was having his own crisis. "Ladies and gentlemen, I honestly don't know how to call this. The human appears to be playing some sort of game with Thok the Destroyer, who has won 47 consecutive death matches and hasn't been confused by an opponent since, well, ever." That's when I remembered something important. I still had coffee residue in my mouth from breakfast. Thok spun around to face me, his yellow eyes blazing with frustration. He opened his massive jaws and let out another roar, and without really thinking about it, I spat. Now, here's something they don't mention in the Galactic Species Handbook. Human saliva, especially human saliva that's been mixed with Earth coffee, is apparently highly acidic to Croxarian physiology. The small amount of liquid that hit Thok's open mouth caused him to make a sound like a tea kettle having an existential crisis. He immediately began hopping around the arena, clawing at his mouth and making distressed gurgling noises. His massive form bounced from wall to wall like a pinball, creating small craters wherever he hit. "Oh wow," I said, genuinely surprised. "That actually worked? I was just trying to be gross." The crowd had gone from confused to stunned to something that might have been horror. Apparently, watching their champion gladiator get taken down by what amounted to flavored spit was not in anyone's expectations for the day. Thok finally stopped bouncing and sat down heavily in the center of the arena, his massive head hanging low. He looked up at me with an expression that somehow conveyed both defeat and deep personal embarrassment, then raised one claw in what I recognized as the universal gesture for "I give up." "Thok the Destroyer has surrendered," Blix announced, his voice climbing several octaves. "The human has defeated Thok the Destroyer with coffee spit. I need a drink." I walked over to Thok, who was still sitting in the sand looking dejected. "Hey, no hard feelings, right?" I said, patting his massive scaled arm. "Want some antacid? I've got some in my toolkit." Thok nodded gratefully, and I tossed him a packet of space Tums from my maintenance belt. The sight of the galaxy's most feared gladiator, carefully opening an antacid packet with his claws while sitting in the sand, was apparently too much for several aliens in the audience, who began making sounds that I assumed were laughter. That left Queen Vexara, who had watched this entire exchange while slowly orbiting us like a crystalline shark. Her razor appendages were now moving in complex patterns, and the light refracting through her body was creating hypnotic geometric shapes on the arena floor. "Well," I said, turning to face her, "I guess it's your turn. Any chance you'd like to just call it a day and grab lunch instead?" Queen Vexara responded to my lunch invitation by making a sound like a wind chime being fed through a wood chipper, which I took as a no thanks. Her crystalline form shifted and flowed like liquid geometry, and suddenly she wasn't just circling me anymore. She was everywhere at once. See, this is where fighting a crystal-based life form gets tricky. Thoque had been straightforward, big, angry, and prone to charging in straight lines. Vexara was like trying to fight a living prism that had taken advanced calculus and decided to use it for evil. She came at me from 3 different angles simultaneously, her razor-sharp appendages slicing through the air where I'd been standing a split second before. I dove behind one of the decorative rocks scattered around the arena and immediately heard the sound of crystal, cutting through stone like butter. "Okay," I muttered to myself. "Coffee spit probably isn't going to work on a being made of living mineral. Time for Plan B." The problem was, I didn't have a Plan B. I was making this up as I went along, which is pretty much how I approach most maintenance problems anyway. Vexcora's appendages punched through the rock I was hiding behind, missing my head by about 6 inches. The holes they left behind were perfectly circular and still glowing with residual energy. I rolled away, just as she shattered the entire boulder into gravel. "Lady, I appreciate the artistic flair," I called out as I scrambled behind another rock, "but you're really overcomplicating this." That's when I noticed something interesting. Every time Vexara moved, the arena's lighting system caught her crystalline body and threw rainbow patterns across the sand. And every time those patterns hit the holographic displays around the arena, they created interference patterns that made the screens flicker. Light refraction, of course. I popped up from behind my cover and took a quick look around the arena. The lighting rigs were suspended from the ceiling on adjustable tracks, designed to follow the action and provide dramatic illumination for the crowd. Each light could be repositioned using manual controls that were probably meant for maintenance access. Maintenance. Finally, something I understood. Vexara launched herself at me like a crystalline meteor, and instead of dodging sideways, I ran straight toward the arena wall. She followed, her razor appendages extending in a deadly web that would have turned me into human confetti if I'd been where she expected me to be. Instead, I grabbed one of the maintenance ladders that led up to the lighting controls and started climbing like my life depended on it, which it absolutely did. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blix announced, his voice cracking with excitement, "the human appears to be climbing? Is this a valid combat strategy? Someone check the rulebook." Vexara hit the wall below me with enough force to crack the reinforced alien concrete. She looked up at me with what I assumed was confusion, though it's hard to read expressions on a face made of living crystal. I reached the first lighting control panel and started frantically adjusting the angles. The massive arena lights began swiveling and rotating, their beams cutting through the air like searchlights during an alien invasion movie. "What are you doing, maintenance creature?" Emperor Zalgorth's voice boomed from the Imperial box. "Improvising," I yelled back, grabbing the manual override for the entire lighting grid. Vexara had started climbing after me, her razor appendages finding purchase in the cracks she'd created in the wall. She moved with terrifying grace, like a deadly spider made of gemstones and bad intentions. But I'd reached the main control panel. I yanked every lever, twisted every dial, and activated every emergency lighting protocol the arena had. Suddenly, 200 high-intensity spotlights were all focused on the same point, Queen Vexara, halfway up the wall, her crystalline body directly in their path. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Vexara's body caught the concentrated light and exploded it outward in every direction. The arena was suddenly filled with thousands of rainbow beams, each one bouncing off her crystalline appendages and reflecting back at different angles. The holographic displays went crazy, flickering and sparking as they tried to process the visual overload. But the real magic happened when those reflected beams hit Vexara herself. Her own crystalline structure was now refracting and re-refracting the light in an endless loop, creating a feedback effect that turned her into essentially a living disco ball. The rainbow patterns were spinning so fast and in so many directions that she couldn't tell which way was up. "I can't see," she cried out, her voice now sounding like a very confused wind chime. Everything is spinning. Make it stop! She lost her grip on the wall and fell to the arena floor, where she lay on her back in the sand, her crystalline appendages waving helplessly as she tried to stop the world from spinning. The concentrated light was still hitting her from every angle, keeping her trapped in her own personal light show. Motion sickness, I called down to her as I climbed back down the ladder. Gets the best of us. You want to surrender, or should I leave the lights on? Vexiara made a sound like someone had put a crystal chandelier in a blender, then weakly raised one appendage in surrender. The crowd was dead silent. 50,000 aliens were staring at the arena floor, where their crystalline champion was lying flat on her back, defeated by being turned into an involuntary light display. I walked over and helped Vexiara sit up, then adjusted the lighting controls to normal levels. There you go, I said, patting what I hoped was her shoulder. Give it a minute and the dizziness should pass. Pro tip: never fight near a disco ball. Blix, the announcer's voice, was barely a whisper. Queen Vexiara has surrendered. The human has defeated both champions using interior lighting and basic physics. I don't even know how to put this on the official record. I looked around the arena, at the two defeated gladiators who were now sitting together in the sand, sharing my antacids, at the 50,000 stunned aliens in the stands, and at Emperor Zalgort in his imperial box, who appeared to be having some kind of breakdown. Well, I said, mostly to myself, that was weird. I wonder if my supervisor is wondering where I am. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 seconds. 50,000 aliens were trying to process what they'd just witnessed, and honestly, I was right there with them. I'd come in here looking for a quiet spot to drink coffee, and somehow I'd ended up as the apparent winner of what seemed to be a pretty big deal. Emperor Zalgarth was the first to find his voice, though it came out as more of a strangled whisper that somehow still managed to boom through the arena's sound system. By the ancient laws of Croxar Prime, he said, each word sounding like it was being physically extracted from him, the human Jake Martinez is hereby declared champion of the arena. The crowd erupted, and by erupted I mean they made sounds I'm pretty sure violated several laws of physics. Some aliens were cheering, some were making what sounded like sobbing noises, and a few seemed to be having religious experiences. In the VIP section, I could see what appeared to be bookmakers frantically trying to calculate payouts for bets that should have been mathematically impossible. Confetti started falling from the ceiling. Alien confetti, which looked suspiciously like tiny holographic projections of my face, all wearing expressions of mild confusion. Someone had apparently programmed victory celebrations while I was busy turning their champion into a disco ball. Jake Martinos, Blix announced, his voice now carrying the kind of forced enthusiasm you hear from sports commentators when something completely unprecedented happens. The new arena champion defeated 2 legendary gladiators using coffee, antacids, and architectural lighting. This will definitely be going into the record books, assuming we can figure out how to describe it. Down in the sand, Thok and Vexiara were looking up at me with expressions that somehow conveyed both respect and deep confusion. Thok rumbled something in his native language that the arena's translation system rendered as, "How did soft pink thing make Thok feel burny in mouth parts?" It's the caffeine, I explained, sitting down next to them on a chunk of the rock Vexiara had destroyed earlier. Apparently it doesn't agree with your species, who knew? Vexiara's crystalline form had stopped spinning, though she was still occasionally flickering with residual light patterns. The geometric possibilities of light refraction, she said, her wind chime voice now tinged with what might have been admiration. I had never considered using them as a weapon against myself. It was clever. Thanks, I said, though to be honest I was mostly just trying not to die. That's when Emperor Zalgord himself descended from his imperial box, floating down on some kind of anti-grav platform that played dramatic music as it moved. Up close, he was even more impressive. 12 arms, compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once, and a crown that looked like it had been carved from a crystallized nebula. Jake Martinez, he said, his voice now carrying the weight of galactic authority. As arena champion, you are entitled to riches beyond imagining. Worlds will pay tribute to your name. The finest warriors in the galaxy will seek to challenge you. You shall have palaces, servants, and glory that will echo through the ages. I looked around at the massive arena, at the cheering crowds, at the holographic displays now showing highlight reels of my greatest hits, which consisted mostly of me looking confused while accidentally defeating legendary warriors. That's very generous, Your Majesty, I said. standing up and brushing sand off my maintenance coveralls. But I'm going to have to pass. The arena went quiet again. Apparently turning down infinite wealth and glory was even more shocking than defeating 2 gladiators with household items. Pass? Zelgorth repeated, his 12 arms gesturing in what I assumed was surprise. You wish to refuse the championship? It's not that I don't appreciate the offer, I said, checking my watch and realizing I'd been gone for almost 2 hours. But I've got a job to finish. That water recycler isn't going to fix itself, and my supervisor gets really cranky when maintenance calls take longer than scheduled. I walked over to the ornamental pedestal where I'd left my coffee mug and picked it up. Empty, unfortunately, but it had sentimental value. Besides, I continued, I'm not really champion material, I just got lucky with some basic problem solving. These 2 are the real fighters. I gestured to Thok and Vexera, who were now standing and looking significantly less interested in murdering me. Thok rumbled something that translated as, "Pink soft thing is wise. Thok respects wise, pink soft thing." Thanks, Thok. That means a lot. Emperor Zalgorth looked like he was having some kind of existential crisis. But the championship, the glory, the eternal fame. We'll have to wait, I said, heading back toward the tunnel I'd originally emerged from. I've got pipes to fix and forms to fill out. This whole thing is going to require so much paperwork. The crowd was making confused murmuring sounds as I walked across the arena floor. 50,000 aliens watching a human maintenance worker casually stroll away from galactic fame and fortune like he was clocking out for lunch. I paused at the tunnel entrance and turned back to wave at the crowd. Thanks for the hospitality, everyone. Great arena, really top-notch facilities. 5 stars, would accidentally trespass again. As I disappeared into the maintenance tunnel, I could hear Blix the announcer trying to wrap up the most bizarre championship match in galactic history. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake Martinez has left the arena. I honestly don't know how to end this broadcast. The human has refused the championship, given health advice to our former champions, and appears to be returning to work. This is definitely a first in arena history. I made my way back through the maintenance corridors, following the familiar sounds of humming machinery and distant pipe noises. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled sounds of 50,000 aliens trying to figure out what had just happened. 20 minutes later, I was back at the water recycler, toolkit in hand, when my supervisor's voice crackled through my comm unit. Martinez, where the hell have you been? That recycler repair was scheduled for 2 hours ago. To the machine, then at my empty coffee mug, then back at the machine. Sorry, Chief, I said, opening my toolkit. Got a little sidetracked, but I'm on it now. Well, get it fixed, and next time try to stay on schedule. We're maintenance workers, not gladiators. I smiled and started unscrewing the access panel. You got it, boss. Definitely not gladiators. Through the walls of the maintenance tunnel, I could still hear the distant sounds of the arena, where they were probably going to be talking about this day for the next 100 years. But I had a recycler to fix, and honestly, that seemed a lot more straightforward than galactic fame.